Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to another session on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. My name is Krishna Prabhu. I'm from ISKCON Zurich, and I'm conducting these interviews on behalf of ISKCON Ministry of Education. There we have a project called Books Are the Basis, and we just try to encourage and inspire devotees to read Srila Prabhupada's books more often. And today we have special guests with us. We are very grateful that with us His Grace Madhavananda Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Thank you for being with us. Madhavananda Prabhu joined ISKCON in the early 80s, 82 in Los Angeles. Later on moved to Bhubaneswar, India, where he received his initiation of His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj. And since that time, actually, Prabhu lives in India, many years in Bhubaneswar, and since some time now in Jagannath Puri. Prabhu is well known as the editor or director of the ISKCON Gopal Jiu publications, well known through his email magazine, Krishna Katamrita Bindu, and of course has published many books. And also for many years, Madhavananda Prabhu has studied very extensively hundreds of Gaudiya Vaishnava literatures in order to produce his magazines also, and therefore has a very broad understanding of Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy and tattva. So very excited to talk to you about the importance of Srila Prabhupada's books. And we start like to hear something. Maybe you can explain to our viewers how you got in touch with Krishna consciousness and what was the first book that you received and how that book changed your life.
The first book that I came in touch with was, it was sometime around 1970 or 1972, around there. I was 10 or 11 years old, and I was a young boy growing up in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And we used to go and play in an abandoned building, an abandoned house. And in this house, some hippies or someone had been staying there, and they'd taken pictures from Srila Prabhupada's Krishna book and cut them out and pasted them on the walls. And I remember at that time, although I was a young boy, I was a little philosophical, and I've been reading the Bible and reading different religions and reading about different mythologies. And I like to know about history of religion and things. And I'd never seen anything like those pictures before. And I remember just staring at them and trying to understand. I could understand something, that this is something spiritual, but who this little blue boy is and all these girls and cows and all these things I couldn't understand. But ironically also, it was around that time in my life that I got some inspiration to be vegetarian. And I hadn't read, at this point, I hadn't read anything of Prabhupada's books. I just saw those pictures. And it can I don't know if it was something to do with those books or what, but I'd never met a vegetarian. I didn't know any vegetarians. I just didn't like meat, and it just seemed the wrong thing to do. And it was around that same time. And then some years later, I'm a little bit of a strange person. After I graduated from high school, I decided I wanted to find God, and I went hitchhiking and wandering around America. And I was living in a cave and different situations like that. And I was a vegetarian, so I would go to the Hare Krishna temples. Some people had recommended that to me. And I'd go there and get some food, and kirtans were nice, and I didn't really read any of the books. But the people were nice, and I liked the food. And then we were going to Austin, Texas. I was a street musician, and we would sit on the street and play music, and people would throw money at us. And when we went to Austin, Texas, I also started going to the preaching center that they had there. And it was there that, I'd gotten books before that. I'd gotten Chant and Be Happy. I was a big fan of the Beatles, but it didn't really touch me. I'd gotten Science of Self-Realization. I'd gotten Bhagavad Gita. I'd seen many books, but I hadn't read any of them, and it didn't really strike me. Until I was in that temple in Austin, Texas, and I made friends with one of the devotees there, and he was talking with me different things, and he said, you're very special. He made me feel special by saying that. You're very special, and you should have a very special book. And he gave me Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. which, as you must know, is not the most introductory book of Srila Prabhupada. And that book made me a devotee. I couldn't understand most of it. I opened it up and I just remember one phrase where Prabhupada spoke about devotional service. And just that phrase, devotional service, struck me very, very deeply. And I could see this as something very deep and very authorized, but still I couldn't really understand so much. And so then I went to, it's a long story. I was living in my cave and trying to chant 16 rounds later after that. And it was really boring trying to live in a cave on Mount Lemmon in Arizona at that time. And so after a little while, I came down from the cave wanting to find devotees. And I came to the nearest town, which was Tucson, Arizona. At that time, there was no center there. And I knew there was no center, but I was hoping to find devotees somehow. So I came in and I was on the street and I met some person and they said, oh, you just missed the Hare Krishnas. They were there at the university. They just left. And I was disappointed. He said, but you know, there's a free sitar concert tonight at the university. I said, oh, that's cool. I like Indian music. So I went and he was wrong. The devotees were still there and there was a festival of India set up and the devotees were undercover with Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gitas, and I think maybe like not chant and be happy, but what is it? The book on reincarnation. Not a second chance, but it's been a long time since I distributed that book. Anyway, one of the small books they put together, Prabhupada, and they had different displays about reincarnation and vegetarianism and Bhagavad Gita in India, but nothing about the Hare Krishna mantra or like that because they were undercover and they were all wearing Western clothes and hats. And when I went up to them, I said, I know who you guys are. You're the Hare Krishna devotees. And oh God. And so they gave me a big plate of prasadam. And then Charu Prabhu, Prabhupada's disciple, came over to me, and I was a caveman, literally a caveman with long hair and living in a cave for so long. And he gave me a case of Bhagavad Gitas and told me to go distribute them. And I said, okay, all right, sure. And I went on and started trying to hand them out to the students. And then Madhua Prabhu, who's been in charge of the Festival of India for decades, invited me to go with him. And so great. So we went and he took me to the LA temple and dropped me off there. And I was so new, I didn't know anything. And after a day or two, someone invited me to help, look, new bhakta, come here and do some work, come and help with this service and clean the go down. So we're cleaning this go down and I found a copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela Chapter 1, which is also not the most introductory book in the world. And I said, well, can I have this? And he said, yeah, sure. And so I started memorizing some verses from that book, from Adi Leela Chapter 4, and things, and it struck me. And then later, a little shortly after that, someone encouraged me to read Prabhupada Lilamrita. And that was really the book I couldn't put down. And I read through Prabhupada Lilamrita, and like many devotees, that really gave me some understanding of the movement and understanding of Prabhupada and what Prabhupada wanted to do. And so anyway, my Guru Maharaj once said that who's really a member of ISKCON? He said, what is ISKCON? ISKCON is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Who's really a member? He said, that person is Krishna conscious. And one time he did that in public, he said that, and he pointed at me. And he said, Madhavananda not yet joined. So people ask me, when did you join ISKCON? I said, well, I'm trying to. I'd like to. And I've had a few books and I've read a few things, but I want to become Krishna conscious. And that's what it really means to be a member of ISKCON. So
that's a beautiful meditation. Do we actually join? So this is almost 40 years ago now. And what impact had reading Srila Prabhupada's book on your life? How did it change your life now, looking back all these years? And why did
Prabhupada's books
to read Prabhupada's
why do what?
And how it's important to read Prabhupada's books daily.
Yeah. If we don't read Srila Prabhupada's books, how can we understand Srila Prabhupada? We've been giving class recently on the Bhagavatam and Krishna book and taking different things. We're speaking about Krishna sending Uddhava to Vrindavan. And one of the things we're reading a lot from is Jiva Goswami's Gopal Champu. And sometimes it's a little high. And I tell the devotees that, you know, when I discuss this with you, I can see Jiva Goswami somewhere laughing and smiling. That here's these Yavana Malechas, these really backward people, and they're trying to read my books. And they're doing it from some translation and a little Sanskrit understanding that we have. And they're doing something. So an author is always pleased when you read their books. I'm a publisher, I know. One of the first things I do when we print a book, we just printed this book, Pariprashna, not so long ago. When I print a book, one of the first things I do after we distribute it, I sit down and I read through it again. But my reading is different this time. Before I'm reading it as an editor, I read it as a proofreader, I read it as a copy editor, I'm doing the layout. But after we distributed it, I read it to think, what are people going to think when they read this? What is their experience going to be? And I think every writer's like that. Srila Prabhupada liked hearing from his own books. Sometimes he would have the devotees read to him from his books. And someone may say that's very narcissistic or something, but no, it's not. Prabhupada didn't have, he's completely humble. But he got some transcendental pleasure thinking of people reading those books. And I in my humble way, I think I can understand a little something of what Prabhupada must have been experiencing, because I like to think, what is the reader going to experience when they start reading the book? And I get pleasure thinking that. I get pleasure when I see someone with a book in their hand. I get pleasure when I see someone writing to me and saying, you know, you wrote this in such and such chapter, and what about this? And it gives me great pleasure. So by reading Srila Prabhupada's books, we come to know him and we learn some Siddhanta. And I'd like to say a few things more about that in a minute, that learning Siddhanta is not just a question of reading a book. But anyway, we learn something, certainly by reading, and we get some inspiration. But to me, more important than all of those previously mentioned things is by reading Srila Prabhupada's books, I'm going to please Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada must be, wherever he's at, he must be smiling. To see, he's reading my books. He must be very pleased by that. And for me, that's much more important than memorizing the different dynasties which are described in the Bhagavatam, or memorizing shlokas, but to get Srila Prabhupada's blessing, his Ashirbad. And that's available by reading his books. And of course, we know also, it's another kind of side topic, but Prabhupada encouraged devotees in his books. He says, for more information about this, one should read Brihad Bhagavatamrita by Sanatana Goswami. One should read commentaries on Vedanta Sutra. Many places in his books, he encourages devotees to read. So there's a connection between Prabhupada's books and the previous acharyas in that way, but there's another connection too. And that other connection is that Srila Prabhupada has distilled all those teachings of the acharyas into his books. Now, it doesn't mean that Srila Prabhupada's books are the only books that we need, and then we should just throw away and burn Brihad Bhagavatamrita and Laghu Bhagavatamrita and Lalita Madhav and all the works of the Goswamis because they're not relevant because we have Prabhupada's books. That's not what Srila Prabhupada said. We should read what Srila Prabhupada says in his books about that. And Prabhupada says we should read these other books. But then the question arises, what is the special quality, the special position of Srila Prabhupada's books? Jiva Goswami, in his Paramatma Sandarbha, he says there's 6 different ways to understand a book. What is the beginning? What is the end? Another one is, what is the purpose of the author? Now, if you want to think about the purpose of the author, and this are important considerations. When we read Prabhupada's books, we can read it like I studied literature a little bit when I in the university before I joined, and they'll have you read George Orwell's 1984 or something, and you'll study that book and you'll master that book. But you don't master Bhagavad Gita. You serve Bhagavad Gita. You don't master Prabhupada's books. You serve Prabhupada's books. So I lost my train of thought. We connect with Srila Prabhupada in this way. And Prabhupada, I remember my point, Prabhupada wrote these books for a particular purpose. Srila Prabhupada, we accept, is a Shaktivesh avatar. He's a manifestation of Krishna who's sent for a specific purpose. His revered godbrother and friend, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, whom Prabhupada had great regard for, once said that Prabhupada was directly empowered by Lord Nityananda, specifically to spread Krishna consciousness to the West. Now, after having lived in India for 30 years, I can tell you that the West also means India. Because if I want to go to America, I just go to Delhi or Mumbai or someplace like that, and you can close your eyes and the girls dress the same way, and the music is the same, and the billboards are the same, and pretty much everything is the same. Even people speak English. So when we say that Prabhupada was empowered to speak to the West, it means he was empowered to speak to the whole world. And Prabhupada, what he did, he took the essence of all of our Gaudiya Vaishnava acharyas and he condensed them in his book in an empowered way so that new people could understand them, but also in a way that my Guru Maharaj spoke, that he gave everything. As you noted in one of our exchanges, that Guru Maharaj, there's actually, you mentioned his personal missions. That's something he mentioned to me personally, this anecdote you're mentioning. It was in 1994 in New York City, and I was alone with Guru Maharaj, and he told me there's three things very important to me. And this is his heart that I see as a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, wanting to please Prabhupada, wanting to push on Prabhupada's mission. And he said, the first thing is I want to preach to the preachers. It causes me so much pain when I see the preachers falling down and going away. And the second thing is that I want to show that everything is in Prabhupada's books, and that these people who speak, that say that Prabhupada only gave ABC, I want to make them mum. And the third thing is I want to show that everything is in Prabhupada's society, ISKCON, and devotees don't have to go outside for so-called higher teachings. So Guru Maharaj was very keen about these things. And these three things, all three are connected intimately with Srila Prabhupada's books. And the first point that he wanted to preach to the preachers, I remember one lecture he gave, and he said that if you can't quote Shastra, don't tell them you're my disciple. My Guru Maharaj said like that. And he expected us to read and understand Shastra, and that begins with Srila Prabhupada's books. And of course, the second point being that everything is in Prabhupada's books. My Guru Maharaj told me once in Bhubaneswar, I was his personal servant for a short time. And the first night that I had that service, he began to speak some little personal things about himself to me, perhaps to make me feel comfortable. And one of them was very much in connection with Prabhupada's books. At that time, not everything had been translated. And Guru Maharaj is living in Bhubaneswar in India, and not so many books of Prabhupada's were available. He was translating Prabhupada's books, Prabhupada's Gita, in some of the Bhagavatam volumes. But my Guru Maharaj, he'd grown up, he was teaching Sanskrit. He was a Bengali scholar in Oriya, and also teaching English in school. And he had no association there in Bhubaneswar. So he said that sometimes he was going to the Satchidananda Mutt, the Gaudiya Mutt, which was established by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in Cuttack. And they had a library there of Sanskrit and Bengali books, and he would read through those books and things. And he told me once, he said that once some devotee there, who apparently was a bit of a shallow person, sectarian, told him, oh, it's good you're reading these books because your Swami Maharaj, or Srila Prabhupada, he only gave ABC. And Guru Maharaj became very upset about that. He told me that was a very big offense. And after that, I no longer went there. And he said, I want to show that everything is in Srila Prabhupada's books. But just as everything is contained within the sutras of the Vedanta, but in a very compressed way. Sometimes also Srila Prabhupada's books are given in a very compressed way. And to give an example, my Guru Maharaj spoke for over 3 days on one sentence from purport in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. I can't remember if it's the first or second chapter, where Prabhupada, one sentence, he said, these three things, Bhakti, Bhakti, and Bhagavan, are not of this material world. And we later made that into the book Mathura Meets Vrindavan. That was the basis of that. And the lecture that he gave in the beginning of that, how everything is in Srila Prabhupada's books. But what does it mean that everything is in Srila Prabhupada's books? That's a big question. As a British poet, I think it was Cowper, once said, we both read the Bible day and night, only you read black and I read white. And my Guru Maharaj appended to that, and then we fight. And so we can see this in Srila Prabhupada's movement. What is the benefit of reading Srila Prabhupada's books? Well, we'll learn the philosophy. We'll be able to represent Srila Prabhupada in a proper way, which is extremely important. If we don't read Srila Prabhupada's books, you can't represent Srila Prabhupada. And more importantly, we'll get the blessings of Srila Prabhupada, and we'll get the blessings of our previous acharyas, because their blessings are coming through Srila Prabhupada. Just as I mentioned how Jiva Goswami must be laughing and smiling to see that these Yavana Malechas are trying to read his book, how happy they must be with what Srila Prabhupada did. How happy Rupa Goswami, and Raghunath Das Goswami, and Gopal Bhatta Goswami, Jiva Goswami, all the Goswamis, and Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and Baladi Vidyabhushan, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, how delighted they must be that Srila Prabhupada took their teachings, and Prabhupada quotes them profusely, all of those personalities throughout his books, how pleased they must be that Prabhupada has brought these books. And now we've been given this, but we've been given this mercy. But as my Guru Maharaj said, why haven't we gotten the mercy? He said, when you go to collect the mercy, you have to have a pot. And this mercy of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, who's Gauranga Singha, who's just like a lion, the lion of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, his lion's milk. And lion's milk is very, very powerful. And if you go with a clay pot, it'll break. It won't be able to collect it. You have to have a gold pot. So what is that golden pot that we need to collect this mercy? That's Trinada Pisanitchina. That's our sincerity. And that's exemplified by our sincerity, how we want to understand Srila Prabhupada's books, how we want to come in touch with Srila Prabhupada. If we don't understand these books, how will our future go on? And I'm sure many devotees have spoke about that at length. It's a very, very important point. And we can't encourage devotees enough. And I'm 100% sure, too, that many of the devotees who've been speaking with you about this topic have been also pointing out that it's a sad state of affairs that many devotees don't read enough. And sometimes devotees, they ask me for techniques, what can you do to read? And I have a number of techniques I'd be happy to share with devotees, very specific things. But the first one's a very simple thing. I heard from secondhand from one devotee who in turn heard from Tamal Krishna Maharaj, who apparently Srila Prabhupada told him that 15 minutes of preparing for class and studying my books for 15 minutes is equal to 2 hours of reading. So let's contemplate that. What does that mean? That doesn't just mean that okay, I'm going to sit down for 15 minutes and I'm going to make up a class and it's going to be the equivalent. Not exactly. But what I see in that statement is that when we have the spirit to share what Srila Prabhupada gave, when we're doing this as a service, to give Srila Prabhupada's teachings to other people, and we're doing it in a structured way, we're trying to, that act of preparing for that is very, very powerful. Whereas if we just read on our own, before I was a devotee, I was captain of my debate team in high school. And I never lost a debate. I was very good at argument. And I had I still have somewhere in Bhubaneswar, that when in Jagannath Puri, when I joined, before I joined, I used to take notes on 3x5 cards. That was a debate system. And then we'd categorize them by different topics. And I had what do you call it, a card chest or whatever for those things. And then when I became a devotee, I got rid of those. But then as a devotee, I started writing those things down. And it was very useful. I still have, I don't know, probably have 3,000 or 4,000 cards that I wrote down like that. And it's useful, and that's nice. but I have to honestly say that it didn't really stick with me so well. My Guru Maharaj told me 4 things. He said, first, you hear from the person. And then after you hear, and that hearing, as I'd like to discuss maybe a little further too, is something Srila Prabhupada stressed. And even Srila Prabhupada in a number of places said that it's not enough just to read my books. And even he said, you can't become a devotee just by reading my books. A very controversial point. Prabhupada says this, and he says it in his books. He says, but one has to hear from a devotee, because by hearing from that devotee, we come in touch with their feelings. And we have service to them. When we see their face, we see the look on their face, and there's some exchange, which we don't get from the book. And therefore, we have 3 things. We have sadhu, we have shastra, and we have guru. Not just that we have 2, that we don't have to have shastra because guru and sadhu are the same as shastra, but shastra is a separate thing from guru. We need all 3. All 3 have some relevant position. And if we get rid of one, we're discussing the importance of reading the books. If we only stress guru and sadhu, that's not enough. How are we going to understand the sadhu? How are we going to serve the sadhu? How are we going to come closer to the sadhu? We have to do some work and read shastra and as a service to guru. But on the other hand, if I try to read shastra, if I try to read books and just have a connection with some previous acharya, just by reading the books, I can have some connection, no doubt, but it's not the same. It's not the same as when you humbly serve someone. So my Guru Maharaj said these 4 things. You hear from the person. And then after you hear, you read. You read, and that reading, by reading, you remember, oh, he said this. I remember Guru Maharaj spoke like this. That devotee in class, he said this thing. And then the 3rd thing you do is you write it down. And by writing it down, you come to understand it. And then the 4th thing that you do, first you hear, then you read, then you write. And then the 4th thing is you speak. And he said, by speaking it, it will become yours. If we go through all 4 of these stages. So we can't separate these different stages from each other. We can't separate Shastra from Guru. We can't separate Guru from Shastra. The 2 are connected. As Bhaktivedanta Maharaj was saying very nicely in some lectures I was saying recently, he's saying we hear from sadhu. And what does sadhu speak? Sadhu speaks Shastra. And by speaking Shastra, then we know that sadhu is bona fide. And by speaking Shastra, then we know we learn something. And we learn that thing by having a relationship with him. I remember once I was invited to give a lecture at a Pandal program in Orissa, in some village area. And they had invited the governor of Orissa to speak. And they also wanted some ISKCON representative. And there was a few scholars there. And so they elected me to be the speaker on behalf of ISKCON. So I got in the car. They sent some official car. And there was a Sanskrit scholar in the car. And we had a friendly conversation on the 1-hour drive or so to the village. And on the way, he was impressing me very much with his knowledge of Shastra. He'd memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita by the time he was like 10 or 12 years old. And he knew, it seemed like, thousands of verses from the Bhagavatam. And not only that, but he knew so many verses from Lalita Madhav and Vidagdha Madhav, and he was quoting from Ujjwal Nilamani and different books of our Goswamis. I was astonished. He was such a learned person. But as we discussed further, I became a little disappointed because I could see he was telling me how he liked to eat fish. And by eating fish, it will give you more memory and you can learn more verses. And he was also fond of smoking cigarettes. And then he began to share with me his ecstatic understanding of the position of Lord Jagannath, that he's actually Buddha. And I wasn't so impressed. But here was somebody who empirically, in terms of information, had probably more knowledge, maybe practically than at least dozens of devotees put together, maybe knew more verses than practically everybody in our society put together, but he didn't know anything. He knew everything, but he knew nothing. And so when we speak about reading Srila Prabhupada's books, it's an extremely important thing, I feel, that we need to understand and bear in mind what was the purpose of Srila Prabhupada. And if we just read the books for the information, then we may not please Srila Prabhupada. We may not understand Srila Prabhupada's purpose. Can I share the screen for a moment here?
Sure, sure.
So this is from an article of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, which he printed in The Harmonist. And I'll go ahead and read it out also while we're looking at it. Those who repeat the teachings of Thakur Bhaktivinoda from memory do not necessarily understand the meaning of the words they mechanically repeat. Those who can pass an empiric examination regarding the contents of his writings are also not necessarily also self-realized souls. They may not at all know the real meaning of the words they've learned by the method of empiric study. And I'm trying to see, where was it in this article? Maybe it's a little previous to this. He wrote this article shortly, a year or two after Bhaktivinoda Thakur passed away. And here it is, maybe a little before. He's saying how as soon as a sympathetic reader is in a position to appreciate the sterling quality of Thakur Bhaktivinoda's philosophy, the entire Vishnu, the whole world of the revealed literatures of the world will automatically open to his reclaimed vision. There have, however, already arisen serious misunderstandings regarding the proper interpretation of the life and teachings of Srila Thakur Bhaktivinoda. And to jump down a sentence or two, there are persons who have got by heart almost everything that he wrote without being able to catch the least particle of his meaning. He says, those therefore who are led astray, who are misled by the perusal of his writings, are led astray by their own obstinate perversity in sticking to the empiric course which they prefer to cherish against his explicit warnings. And he says the personal service of the pure devotee is essential for understanding the spiritual meaning of the words of Thakur Bhaktivinoda. The present editor has all along felt it his paramount duty to try to clear up the meaning of the life and teachings of Thakur Bhaktivinoda by the method of submissive listening to the transcendental sound from the lips of the pure devotee. And there's a nice story in this regard. There was one scholar who came to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he had some question, very deep philosophical question. He was a very big Sanskrit pundit, and he'd been to so many different scholars and acharyas all over India, but he couldn't find anyone who could answer his question. And so people had told him, this Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he really knows. And so he came to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And Maharaj, please, I want to know, I have some questions. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, I'm sorry, I'm very busy right now. But if you go downstairs in the kitchen, you'll find such and such devotee, and he can answer your question. Okay, so he went down to the kitchen and he asked about that devotee, and they pointed to someone who was washing the pots. And that's him. You may know this story. And by this time, he's very taken aback. And he went to that pot washer, said, excuse me, you such and such person? Yes, and he said, there must be something wrong here. I was told I have this big question, which none of the biggest scholars could answer. And I came to your Guru Maharaj, and he told me to come and ask you. And that devotee said, yeah, I don't know why he told you to come to me. I'm just a new person here. I don't know so much. He said, but I'll tell you what, if you could help me out washing the dishes, then maybe I'll try to give some answer. And then this man is also taken aback by that. What do you mean, wash the dishes? I'm a very big, important person. But somehow he did that, and he started washing the dishes. And after a half an hour or so washing the pots and pans, suddenly there was like a eureka moment for him. And he became very excited, and he ran upstairs. He left that kitchen and that devotee. He ran back to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and offered obeisance and said, I've understood the answer to the question. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta understood that for him to learn this thing, he has to do some service. So we can't think like my scholar friend that I met in that car that day, that I can just memorize all the books, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is saying. Someone may memorize all the teachings of Bhaktivinoda and not understand anything he's written. And similarly, I can say it boldly. Someone may memorize all of Srila Prabhupada's books and not necessarily understand anything of them if they don't render service. And on the other hand, we can think of devotees like Jayananda. And I heard from Vatsal Prabhu, who was one of he's my first temple president. And Vatsal was one of the early devotees and associate of Jayananda. And once he asked Jayananda Prabhu, how did you become so advanced? What are you reading and this and that? And Jayananda told him very frankly, said, to tell you the truth, I don't have much time for reading. He said, but I just work hard for Srila Prabhupada. And he was doing that with so much love and devotion. I'm not recommending that we take that course. It's different for different persons. And as preachers, we should know Srila Prabhupada's books. My grandma said, if you can't quote Shastra, don't tell them you're my disciple. And he said, if someone's a sannyasi, that they must know Shastra. We have to learn Prabhupada's books. It's so important. But learning Srila Prabhupada's books, like the story told of this scholar who came to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, it's not just an empiric activity. And I feel concerned sometimes for our society as we grow and we want to make things nice and orderly. You're a temple president in Zurich. You like it if everybody is nice and neat, because the Swiss people are very neat and organized. You make watches there, right? You like organization. I appreciate that. And things are very nicely organized there. We want to encourage that. But at the same time, it's not just through reading of the books that everything's going to happen, but there has to be some personal connection. And Srila Prabhupada, in a number of places in his books, he says it's not enough. He says in Chaitanya Charitamrita that one should not proudly think they can become a devotee just by reading books, but one has to serve the Vaishnavas. It's a very, very important point. We can't separate these two things. We must. It's such a beautiful and important mission that you're taking part in, to encourage the reading of Prabhupada's books, because people are not doing that. And if we want to join the Hare Krishna movement, if we want to become a member of ISKCON, we should read Prabhupada's books. Otherwise, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what this movement's all about. But at the same time, that's also not enough. It's not enough just to be a scholar, but we also have to render service. We have to render service to a person. I'm sorry, I'm talking so much. Do you have any reflections on these things, Prabhuji?
Thank you very much. You make my job very easy because
just put a mic in front of me. I'll
most of the questions have been answered. I mean, I appreciate very much your point. Basically, you're stressing very much that it says Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, but we understand there is Bhakta Bhagavat and there is Granta Bhagavat. And yes, we are, of course, our mission is called Books are the Basis, so we're stressing the Granta Bhagavat, how we should read Prabhupada's books. At the same time, you're helping us to remember that the Bhakta Bhagavat that is connected, that we read the books, but we also need to serve pure devotees. And in combination of these, actually the knowledge can be really absorbed. So yeah, thank you for giving emphasis on this point.
We want to read Srila Prabhupada's books, but for me, I can't separate Srila Prabhupada's disciples from Prabhupada's books. I can't separate those devotees who've dedicated their lives, who've gone in. We're going out for 8 to 10 hours a day on the streets, And sometimes people were attacking them and beating them, or they're going to jail and things to push on Srila Prabhupada's books. I can't separate that from the reading of Prabhupada's books. And I feel that if I do try to separate that, I'm going to become impersonal. And it concerns me when I see a religious movement like Christianity, which Prabhupada sometimes would criticize and call it churchianity, where they ended up stressing more. You read the Bible, then they were stressing about the saints, at least in certain Christian traditions, the traditions I was used to in America. They didn't stress so much about the lives of the saints or the importance of coming in touch with saints. And we need that. And even in the case of Srila Prabhupada's books, we both read the Bible day and night, only you read black and I read white. And we see the same thing with Srila Prabhupada's books sometimes. And devotees have different perspectives, and sometimes they may both be correct. But how to apply them at the right time is not, the wisdom for that is something which is vigyan. Tad vigyanartam. Sarum gurum ivabhigachet. Prabhupada said this word ivabhigachet means you must. We must approach Guru. And in one lecture in Bombay, Prabhupada said, you may have read Bhagavad Gita 100 times. You may have read it 1,000 times, but you won't understand a single word unless you approach Guru. We have to do that. But both things are there. The bona fide books tell us that we should hear from bona fide persons. And bona fide persons tell us we should read from bona fide books. And the two have a very intimate connection, as you pointed out. The Duistani Bhagavat, there's two Bhagavats, the Grantha Bhagavat and the Krishna Kripa Patra, in the language of Vrindavan Das Thakur. He says that the Bhakta Bhagavat, the devotee who's the embodiment of Krishna's mercy. And if we take one and reject the other, we won't be successful in doing what Srila Prabhupada wanted. We may get a lot of information. We may even become like my friend, that scholar in Orissa who knew thousands of verses, but we won't be able to push on this movement. But both things are required. And they need to go hand in hand strongly. So when we speak about reading, I can't separate service from reading, because by that service they will understand. Can I tell you one more story?
Sure.
Okay. This is in the line of Ramanujacharya in the Sri Sampradaya. There's one devotee whose name was Quresh. And Quresh to this day in the Sri Sampradaya is a very famous devotee. He was one of the most prominent disciples of Ramanuja. He was a great Sanskrit scholar, like the most learned person of the day, practically after his Guru Maharaj. And also very advanced and very humble and pious. And one day he came to Ramanuja with what may seem to us to be a very simple question. He said, could you please explain to me the meaning of the verse, Sarva Dharman Parityagya? And Ramanuja looked at him and he said something to the effect that if you do Guru Seva and you work hard for like 5 years, then maybe you'll understand the meaning of this verse. And Quresh was a little discouraged when he heard that. He said, but Guru Maharaj, I don't know if I'm going to live that long. And then Ramanuja told him, he said, well, okay. He said, isn't there some shortcut? And he said, okay, if you go for 1 month and you just beg from different houses every day, not knowing where you're going to get your food, and you serve the Vaishnavas, then you come to me after that time. And so Quresh did that and came back to him. And then Ramanuja explained to him the meaning of that verse. Now we can hear that story, and that story may sound rather quaint, but for those of us in the Google era, where information is very cheap, we may become confused and we may think, what did he need to do that for? Oh, he's a Sanskrit scholar. He could read these other commentaries on the Gita. Ramanuja himself wrote a Gita Bhashya. He could have read his Guru Maharaj's commentary. Why did he do this? Now, perhaps a clue is given in Chaitanya Charitamrita in a famous verse, which is spoken by Lord Shiva, speaking about the Bhagavatam. He said, Aham ved me, I understand Srimad Bhagavatam. Shuklavedi, Shukadeva Goswami, he understands Srimad Bhagavatam. And he says something very confusing. Vyasa Vedi na Vedi va. Whether Vyasadeva understands or not, I don't know. I can't really say. And there's a long history to that because Shukadeva Goswami personally heard from Lord Sheila. That's another story. So he doesn't know whether Vyasa knows or not. Vyasa compiled the Bhagavatam, but I don't know if he knows it or not. And then he gives us a clue. Bhaktya Bhagavatam Grayam, na Buddhaya, na Chatikaya, na Buddhaya. You can't understand the Bhagavatam with your intelligence. Like the scholar friend I was mentioning, who'd memorized the entire Gita. He can't understand it, even though na Buddhaya, na Chatikaya. Just by reading the commentaries. He could read the Sanskrit commentaries, but he still can't understand. Bhaktya Bhagavatam Grayam. That this Bhagavatam is non-different from Krishna. And just as Krishna says in the Gita, Bhaktya Mam Abhijanati Yavanyaschasmi Tattvata. If you want to know me, the only way to know me is through bhakti. So the only way to understand Bhagavatam is through bhakti. And therefore, Krishna tells Arjuna in the Adi Purana, a verse which is quoted profusely by Prabhupada, and also by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, by Bhaktivinoda, by Jiva Goswami in Sandarbhas. It's quoted by Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It's quoted by Sanatana Goswami in Hari Bhakti Dilas. It's an important verse. And Krishna tells Arjuna, Ye me bhakta jana partha. Those persons, O Partha, who say they're my devotee. Ye me bhakta jana partha. Na me bhakta state chama. They're not my bhakta. They're not really my devotee. But those persons who are devotees of my devotee, they're my real devotees. So the Bhagavatam is non-different from Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada's books are Krishna. They're 100% Krishna. And it's not that they're watered down in some way, that they become partly mundane or something. They're fully spiritual. And the only way to understand that spirit is by spirit, by the connection of spirit, by the connection of guru. So we should read Prabhupada's books to help us understand who is guru, who is sadhu. And then when we've gotten connection with sadhu and guru and we get initiated, then we again read the books to serve them. Because unless I read Srila Prabhupada's books, what kind of service can I do for my Guru Maharaj? What kind of representative will I be? What kind of representative will I be for Srila Prabhupada's movement? But we have to read those books as a service, not just in a scholastic, informational kind of way. Although just even doing that is also good. If someone's attached to that scholastic way, that's also very good. Please do that. But you're not going to get the same result as if you follow the system which is given in our tradition of approaching Guru. And therefore, Ramanuja told Quresh, you go out and you behave in this way, you beg from house to house. And then he told Quresh the meaning of this verse. So the point of that story is that it's not just by empirical information. He could have read a commentary, but there's a transmission of bhakti, a transmission of vigyan, transcendental understanding that goes from the heart of sadhu guru to that disciple. And there's a danger in any religious organization, like in the Zurich temple, when we want to make things very Swedish, very Swiss, and very, not Swedish, but very Swiss, very organized like a watch, and very organized in that way, that we emphasize routines and techniques and like that, and we forget about the essential quality, which is a personal quality. And therefore, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it says that Krishna Tulya Bhagavat, that the Bhagavatam is the incarnation of Krishna. Krishna Tulya, it's Tulya, it's the same as Krishna. Vibhu Sarvashwar. It's Vibhu, just as Krishna's Vibhu, God, so is the Bhagavatam. And Prati Shloke, Prati Akshare, Nanartha Koi. Every verse, every shloka, every akshara, every syllable has unlimited meanings. So that those unlimited meanings are not going to open to us just by some empiric reading, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said about the readers of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's works, that they may memorize every word, but still they won't understand. And Srila Prabhupada said some similar things also. Ah, I don't know if I could find that real quick here. Do you have any reflections or comments? I feel bad. You have so many thoughts, Prabhuji.
Well, I think, I mean, one question that I had was how to make sure to actually apply what we read. But in some way, you already answered it by emphasizing this point that it's not about just scholarship and learning, but it's about attracting the mercy. It's about serving sadhus. It's about, you know, understanding the knowledge through actually the parampara, through receiving the knowledge through guru. But yeah, if you have any further reflection on how to make sure that we can.
Yeah, I would like to share another reflection to go in a more mechanical way, not to scare anybody with all this too much theory. We have too much theory sometimes also that there can be a problem with that. If there's too much theory, then it can be theoretical and we don't understand properly either. And I actually began to mention something about this in the beginning, how I was interested in debate before I joined, and I collected notes. And I started doing the same thing when I joined. And I still have a few thousand those little notes and the little cards, but I no longer use those. At a certain point, when I met my Guru Maharaj, I saw what he was doing, that he would read from Prabhupada's books and also different books of the Acharyas, and he would take notes of it in books. And those notes were practical. They were notes that he was using for class. Just as we mentioned Prabhupada's comment to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, that 15 minutes of preparing for class is the same as 2 hours of reading. So preparing for class in that way and writing down in the books, and then you keep that. So again, those 4 things my Guru Maharaj told me: you hear, you read, you write, and you speak. So I began to do that. I started, and to this day, I think I have 21 or 22 notebooks. And I used to wrap them up in cloth very traditionally and travel over with them until the airlines started making the weight allowance much less. And I could no longer travel with them. And so at a certain point, I scanned all of them. And now I have them in PDF, and I have things in soft copy, and I use that when I travel. And I have a system. Before I give a class, I read something. And I find that reading, even if it's just a few minutes, is so powerful because it's reading as a service for Srila Prabhupada. It's reading as a service for my Guru Maharaj. I'm very conscious of my Guru Maharaj when I do that. And there's some connection there, and something happens. Is that helpful?
Yes, I think that point you mentioned, that actually by sharing what we read, it makes it very potent. And also, of course, if we read something and we know that we have to speak about it, it's a different way we absorb in the reading. We just read like that.
I have a bit of a passion about this also. I mentioned these 3 things that my Guru Maharaj had told me. I want to preach to the preachers. It makes me unhappy seeing them fall down and go away. I want to show that everything is in Srila Prabhupada's books. And the third thing, I want to show that everything is in Prabhupada's society. And he was also very, very concerned about that because his perspective was different. You're someone who you grew up in Europe. I grew up in America. We came to Krishna consciousness later in our life. We didn't grow up with it. But here's someone who grew up with it from his childhood. In fact, his family for generations were Gaudiya Vaishnavas before his birth. So he was something used to that. And he knew many Gaudiya Vaishnavas in Orissa. And it caused him pain when he saw devotees leaving ISKCON because we weren't reading the books. It caused him pain in his heart to see people criticizing and saying that Prabhupada only gave ABC. He wanted to show that Prabhupada gave everything. Read teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Oh my God. read, Prabhupada gave everything in his books. And he wanted to show that we have everything in our society. And for that, devotees have to read. We have to imbibe very deeply Prabhupada's teachings. And I often hear, I don't want to say something discouraging, but just to be very blunt and very frank, one of the most common complaints that I hear about our society, and I listen to people's concerns because I want to try to serve Prabhupada's mission. I'm concerned when I hear complaints. And one of the most common complaints I hear is about the quality of the classes in our society. And I can attest to that. I am a devotee. Actually, he was a sannyasi, Prabhupada disciple, and he was giving the class, and I was eager to attend. He's a very wonderful devotee. I love him very much. But I was very disappointed with the class. The main point in the class was that Krishna is blue, and so is Spider-Man and Superman. They also wear blue outfits. And therefore, Krishna is also like Superman or Spider-Man or something. And that was the main point. And because I knew that devotee, I knew the service he'd done for many years, and I had some connection with him. I love him, and it didn't disturb me. But I felt very concerned that new devotees who come, or thoughtful, educated people who come, and they hear something like that, and then they go outside and they see ISKCON's not the only Gaudiya Vaishnava group anymore. And we don't hate those other groups. They're our brothers and sisters. We have a similar mission. But at the same time, this is Prabhupada's Seva Sangha. And my Guru Maharaj also personally told me another instruction. He said we should work to help uphold the prestige of Prabhupada's mission. And he said the best way to do that is to have nice Vaishnava dealings and nice Krishna Katha. So when we have classes which are not very substantial, when devotees haven't read Prabhupada's books very deeply, and they can't quote Prabhupada's books, then there are devotees who are hungry for that. Then they may end up going somewhere else. And we're not helping Prabhupada's Seva Sangha in that way. And I don't mean to be sectarian or anything. I have friends who are in the Gaudiya Mat. I have scholarly friends amongst different Gaudiya Vaishnavas, and I respect and love them and appreciate them. And I don't think that ISKCON is the only group in the world. Prabhupada says in the Nectar Devotion, there are many Gaudiya Vaishnava societies. We're not the only one. Again, in teachings in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, when he speaks about the tree of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says that ISKCON is one of the branches. There are other branches. We're not fanatics, but this is the branch that I belong to, that my Gurudev belongs to, that my Param Gurudev belongs to. And I want to serve the Seva Sangha mission of this particular branch. And to do that effectively, I absolutely have to read Srila Prabhupada's books. And I have to speak that in class. Those persons who give class have an obligation. It's not enough just to sit down and tell some stories or something because we can't speak, we can't quote verses or something. If we're going to give class, we should be well versed in Prabhupada's books. It's a very important principle. And I want to thank you so much in the Ministry of Education for the good work you're doing in this regard. It's such a very, very important thing to encourage devotees to read the books and to live the books. So thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you very much, Madhavananda Prabhu. I think we got a lot of nourishment. We just spoke. The preacher should speak in a way that the audience feel nourished deeply spiritually. And I think you just by your own example gave a lot of deep insights. So I thank you very much for all these reflections. And let us all study.
Thank you, Prabhu. You know, one thing I love about Prabhupada's disciples and Prabhupada's followers, I feel like they're moving books. They are the embodiment of Prabhupada's books. And that's what we want to become. That's what we want to encourage devotees to become, the embodiment of the book. We want them to encourage them to become Bhakta Bhagavats. And then we can really spread the book Bhagavat. So thank you again, Prabhuji.
Thank you very much. I think that's a wonderful point to stop.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai. Srila Prabhupada's books ki jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinda ki jai. Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpadrubhishcha. Kripa sindhubheva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Nandakori Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama.